Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Today we explore the last of the gospel readings that were so important in the ancient church. The woman at the well, the healing of the man born blind, the raising of Lazarus. In the early church, the catechumens entered deeply into these three passages as a kind of self-examination, which is why these passages are sometimes called the scrutinies. These passages enabled them to scrutinize their lives, a service they perform for us as well. This beloved passage of the raising of Lazarus is well known as the time when Jesus raised someone from the dead. It is full of such build-up and detail and drama that we might forget that this is actually the third time that Jesus raised someone from the dead in the Gospels. Previously, according to the Gospel of Luke, Jesus had encountered a funeral procession going through the town of Nain, which is in the region of Galilee, and he raised a widow's deceased son back to life. We can well imagine what this meant for the widow, with her husband already deceased. Her son may have been her only means of survival, and he was restored to her. Also in the region of Galilee, Jesus had raised the daughter of Jairus, the synagogue's leader, back from the dead. So what makes Lazarus' resurrection so different from the others? The others were born of Jesus' compassion in the moment. God's miracles are not parlor tricks, but expressions of a compassionate God. Compassion toward a widow who was now losing her son. Compassion toward faithful parents who are now losing their daughter. These were incidents that he came upon. They happened in the region of Galilee, 20 miles north of Jerusalem. They were therefore witnessed to and yet remote, rumored, easy to deny. But the resurrection of Lazarus took place in Bethany, which is just 2 miles from Jerusalem. Lazarus was well known in the area. Friends came out from Jerusalem to be with the family. The gospel writer is careful to tell us that Jesus delays his coming. There is something strategic going on here, a holy calculation. We will often see in these final weeks of Jesus' life very deliberate planning. He arranges for a donkey in advance in the village of Bethsaida, just outside of Jerusalem, so that he will ride into Jerusalem in triumph, revealing his identity as the foretold, humble, messianic king. He arranges for the Last Supper in advance with secret signals leading to the furnished upper room where he could inaugurate the Eucharistic meal that would feed his people through the millennia. Jesus is divinely tactical. The death of Lazarus, even though he knows what he will ultimately do, moves Jesus. The tragedy of death is real to him. Universally, death causes grief, and it causes us grief in proportion to our love. There is nothing blithe here. Now, Jesus' friends Martha and Mary do not seem to know about the other resurrections. I imagine this is not the kind of thing that Jesus talked about to his friends. But they know about his abilities as a healer. And so they are full of recriminations. If you had come earlier, this would not have, you could have prevented this. Now, this is not technically true. Because when Jesus received word, he delayed his coming for 2 days, but when he arrived, Lazarus had been dead for 4. Martha and Mary are stuck in some woulda, coulda, shouldas, rather than seeing what Jesus is actually doing. But Jesus is not one to quibble. He gets to the heart of the matter. Believe. I am resurrection and I am the life. He's not talking about some pie in the sky by and by, but he's talking about here and now. Jesus often asks people to believe, usually in anticipation of a miracle. Belief changes everything. It causes us to see things differently. It opens the door to new possibilities. When we believe, we see more than the things that are before our eyes and begin to see things through more hopeful, loving, courageous, and visionary eyes. We think toward a new kind of community, and we are led to build that community now. We see that for Jesus, death is not the final word. The raising of Lazarus is integral to the larger divine strategy. He is putting the powers of death on notice and initiating a predictable series of events. Jesus is aware that evil relies ultimately on the threat of death, the power of death, the fear of death. At the time of Jesus, this threat held together the Roman Empire. The violence of its conquering armies and its occupying forces ensured its dominance. If we read on in the passage, we see the Sanhedrin was accustomed to cooperating with this power, and that they react to the raising of Lazarus in a foreseeable way. Our passage, past the point that was written today, continues. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had seen what Jesus did, believed in him, but some of them went to the Sanhedrin, to the Pharisees, and told them what Jesus had done. This is a miracle that no one doubts or denies. Some come to believe because of it. Others run to report it to the Pharisees. But no one denies that it has happened. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, "What are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our holy place," which refers to the temple, "and our nation," which refers to the semi-autonomous state of the Jews under the Roman Empire. The Sanhedrin has a working theory that a popular messianic miracle-working figure would only create havoc and produce dire consequences. But Jesus, in his ministry of teaching, healing, feeding, and miracle working, has lent little evidence to their theory. He attracts 5,000 men. Even not counting the women and children, this is still the size of a Roman legion, who sit peaceably on a hillside to be taught and fed, and at the end of the day, Jesus sends them home. Where are the dire consequences that the Sanhedrin fears? The possibility that Jesus is the Messiah is not raised, even though there are rumors and signs that he is. The thought that Jesus should be protected rather than persecuted is far from their discussion. The use of the emphatic pronouns in the Greek, our holy place and our nation, indicates that the concern is not so much national, but personal. They are acting to maintain their power and position within the state, as granted to them by Rome. All of this can be observed before Caiaphas opens his mouth. "You know nothing at all," he says to his colleagues. "You do not understand that it is expedient for you that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation should not perish." The logic is that of a temple priest, but it is perverted. Caiaphas is applying the principle of sacrificing a living animal for the sake of the whole and applying it ruthlessly to the body politic. The idea that the temple priest would sacrifice a human being for the sake of the people should have struck the entire Sanhedrin as the perversion that it was. But in their alarm, they do not see this. The cause of the living God is abandoned in what Leslie Newbigin calls one sorry, impassioned hour to save their political skins. Now, these events do not take the Son of Man by surprise. He can rely on this behavior. He can take it to the bank. What makes the resurrection of Lazarus so important? It is that it is the one that leads to Jesus' death. It sets in motion a series of events that Jesus can foresee. It is this resurrection that costs Jesus dearly, not for the sake of Lazarus alone, but for the sake of us all. This passage enables us to scrutinize our lives. Is the cost of his sacrifice mirrored in the cost of our discipleship? Do we have the kind of belief that changes everything? Does our faith cause us to see things differently? Does it open the door to new possibilities? Do we see things through hopeful, loving, courageous, and visionary eyes? Do we think toward and build a new kind of community? Or are we blinded by cynicism? Do we fear what Christ can do? Do we fear being unseated from our own thrones? Do we fear light being shed on our own expediencies? My friends, Jesus tells us, "I am the resurrection and the life." Let us be open then to all that he can do among us. Let us put aside all cynicism and fear and negativity. Let us be open to the glorious ways he would work among us. Let us take courage and let his words echo in our hearts. Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? Amen.